Hey everybody, it's Mark T here, and I'm jumping back into making regular videos. Now I'm not going to make any false promises. I think we all know by this point how futile it is for me to promise to make videos. So let me just say, I watched a new anime today, and I want to review each episode as it comes out as consistently as possible. That anime is Yashahime, which is the sequel series to Inuyasha, one of the most important anime that ever existed, at least to me. A little bit of backstory, if I hadn't mentioned it before, I like I didn't know what anime was as a kid. Uh, I just really didn't. Anime to me seemed like it was just a different art style of cartoons. It was just you know like a different art style. And that was what it was, and that was enough of an explanation to me. And then, on one fateful Friday night, when I was lying on the couch and flipping through channels, I popped on to YTV and saw what was the first episode of Inuyasha. I think it was roughly around like 9 o'clock, or, well, no, like roughly like 8 or 9 o'clock. And I sat through the first episode, really curious about what it was. The art style was very interesting, and like the plot seemed interesting too. So I was like, what the hell? I stuck with it. I watched the first episode, and then I also watched the second episode that came in right afterward, and I was hooked like that. It's one of those things I find kind of funny in my life, how either lucky or unlucky I can be sometimes. Just happening to flip to the right channel to get myself dug into something that would consume my whole life for a very long time, and even now it has yet to stop. If I were to turn this camera, you'd see a number of anime-related objects, not just my Volume 1 of Yaiba over here. But yeah, so that's why this series is, in my opinion, very interesting and yet also very worrisome to a certain extent. Now, let me say, I'm not going to be super harsh on Yashahime, mostly because, again, it's a sequel series. It is not necessarily, I don't base its merits or its faults off of Inuyasha. Inuyasha had its own faults, which I will mention in a later video, maybe after I finish Season 1 of Yashahime. But until then, I will let it speak its own way, just like how I did with Girl Meets World. Follow it on its own merits. Don't let what its predecessor did have a big effect on it. But it is interesting how they did this first episode. We basically start with the one of the two daughters of Sesshomaru. I can't believe, I think her name is Toa, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Toa, and she's in a room being interrogated by a lord, and he really kind of just looks like a manservant, really, in a sense. And they basically tell her the story of, I believe it was Roothead was the name of the demon, which is kind of important to the plot, but they haven't mentioned a whole lot about his uh, thing. But basically, they just do like a short, well, a fairly large backstory story discussing like what exactly they were doing, like what the Inuyasha crew was doing. Of course, Moroku and Inuyasha were hunting for demons. Kagome was learning to be a priestess, and Sango was being a mother of three, which is always fun, if you ask me. Terrible, but yeah. So it just goes into them. Unfortunately, they don't do a lot of depth for this. It basically feels like an episode of Inuyasha that's just like a cut-off plot. Obviously, this demon will be important in the future, and it's like from the trailer, if you've seen it, you'd have seen like it has some kind of connection with the tree that Inuyasha was stuck to for a number of years, and it's all coming together. But again, it's still too soon to say anything definite. But honestly, I like it. We also get to see uh, Toa's sister and also Inuyasha and Kagome's daughter, Moroha, and Toa's sister Setsuna. And again, like I said, still really early on, but I kind of like what I'm seeing. I'll be honest, I was kind of iffy on this, like the series, like when I first saw it, mostly because I don't know how to feel really. Inuyasha, I find in a lot of ways was fairly flawed in some ways and bogged down and tried to stretch the story way too thin. But this series I think has an interesting concept and has just as much interest as, let's say, something as like Legend of Korra, that we're curious what happened before and even why these three, I think they're pretty much just teenage girls, are on this adventure and we can't even see their parents yet. But again, questions need to be answered. Overall, I think the first episode was interesting. I mean, mostly it was just a single Inuyasha story, but, it is pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. So, welcome to a hopefully consistent anime review series from me, Mark T. So, good night.